The psycho shower scene was one of the most terrifying 3 minutes ever put on film at the time of its release. What's truly masterful is that even though it's famous for its horrific violence, you never actually see the blade piercing the skin. So how did Alfred Hitchcock and editor George Tomasini create such lasting terror? In this video, we're gonna go shot by shot to break down the rapid-fire editing, disorienting camera angles, and brilliant sound design they used to imply extreme violence, permanently changing how movies and bathrooms would be seen forever. So let's jump into the scene. Okay, so the first thing to notice in these opening shots is how once Marion, who's the main character here, once she enters the bathroom, there's a cut after every action of hers, which is very different from the opening shot of the scene. If we look at this opening shot, it's one long continuous shot as she walks into the bathroom. There are no edits. Once she enters the bathroom, we cut in close on like a waist up shot of her. We cut to a close-up of the toilet. Then as she flushes and puts the lid down on the toilet, we cut again to this medium close-up shot of her. And then as she disrobes, we cut again to her legs as she hops into the tub. We can imagine an alternate version of this scene where Marion enters the bathroom and you just have one wide shot where you see the whole bathroom and you just see her throw the piece of paper in the toilet, she flushes, gets into the tub. That can all be done in one uncut shot. But the fact that we're cutting just keeps us close to the subject. It keeps us close to Marion, and it therefore builds a little bit of intimacy with her. It builds some form of a rapport. And this intimacy that we feel with her is heightened significantly once she takes off her bathrobe. We're close to her in this very vulnerable moment of hers. Also, fun fact, this toilet is actually the first time a toilet was shown flushing in an American film. And it's interesting because it's not a discrete shot of the toilet. It's not like the toilet is in a small little corner of the frame. It's a nice big close-up shot of the toilet bowl. And this to me is Hitchcock's way of telling you, I'm not afraid to shock you. This movie is gonna show you things you've never seen before. And that's kind of a subtle foreshadowing for what's gonna come later in the scene. So once Marion hops into the shower and draws back the curtain, we have this medium shot of her where we see her obscured behind the shower curtain. We see her silhouette. And this is an interesting shot to me because, like I mentioned before, we were always close on Marion. We were building intimacy with her. And this breaks the intimacy that we felt with her because we're no longer seeing the scene from her perspective. If we were seeing the scene from her perspective, we would be with her inside of the shower. And Hitchcock and Tomasini could have easily cut from her drawing the curtain back to her inside of the shower. The continuity there would have been absolutely fine. But Hitchcock and Tomasini intentionally included this shot where we see her from outside the shower. So we break the perspective. And this break in perspective, to me, is a hint that there's somebody watching her. There's something to be aware of outside of this shower curtain. And also to accomplish this shot, Hitchcock hired a nude model to see how thick the shower curtain needed to be for it to obscure everything just enough. He wanted to show you just enough to once again imply nudity, but not actually reveal anything. So he hired a new nude model to really figure out where that barometer was. So now we're back with her inside of the shower, or once again with her in her perspective. The thing to notice here is the sound design. Pay close attention to how loud the shower is. Let's play it again. The sound design on the water coming out of the shower is almost abnormally loud. It really kind of overwhelms and overpowers the scene. At one point, she rubs her hands like this under the shower. If this sound design were trying to be reflective of real life, if it was realistic sound design, you would hear the water splashing under the shower. The shower wouldn't be so loud that you can't hear this. But the fact that they purposefully omitted this is an intentional choice that tells us that this shower is very loud and Marion cannot hear anything outside of it. And that's going to be very crucial later on in the scene. So now we have an iconic shot of this scene, which is the close-up of the shower head. And on surface level, this does not really seem like an important shot. Like there's no new information revealed in this shot. It would be easy to imagine that this scene would probably play just as well without needing this shot. But usually in cinematic language, when you have a close-up like this, a close-up usually signifies that there's something important about this shot that you need to pay attention to. And clearly, it was very important to Hitchcock because Hitchcock is known for being very meticulous, and he wanted this shot so badly that the prop department had to create a special shower head where the water would shoot out onto the side so that you can place the camera under it and the camera wouldn't get wet. So if the prop department and everybody had to go through all this trouble to accomplish this shot, clearly it means something to Hitchcock. So why did Hitchcock feel like this shot was so important? Well, when you actually study it, there's 3 key functions that this shot has. The first function, it places us directly into Marion's point of view. We see the shower head the way she would see it. We're under the water with her. Once again, building this rapport and this connection that we have and feel to the character. The second thing it does is that because the water is shooting out onto the sides of the camera, it feels like we're really being enveloped by the water. And because we're in Marion's point of view, we feel like Marion is surrounded by the water and cannot see or hear anything other than the water. This is once again reinforcing the sound design choice that they had of making the water so loud. The final thing it does, and this is my personal theory, I don't know if this hasn't been confirmed, but I have a case for it, I think. My theory is that if you look at the shape of this shower head, it almost looks like an eye. You have the outline and then you have the little pupil in the middle. And so it gives the sense to me that somebody's watching her. Remember when I said earlier we had this perspective change outside of the shower curtain, feeling like somebody's watching her? This is another case of feeling like somebody or something is watching her. This is an eye looking down on her. It kind of has a voyeuristic feel to it. To make my case, there's another shot in this film where you see Norman Bates kind of spying on her through a peephole. So there's already this voyeuristic thematic element that's baked into the film, and this to me is just another example of that. What I want to point out about these 3 shots, we have 3 different camera angles of Marion showering. Why would we need 3 different camera angles of that? You could easily capture this in one camera angle, right? But Hitchcock is intentionally switching the angle on us constantly. And look at this difference in the 2 camera angles. You have one camera angle here, and then you have the next one that's a very similar angle. It's just slightly, the camera is just slightly off its axis. Not only is he doing that, but there's something that feels off about the editing here because it's what's called unmotivated cuts. In the world of editing, you have unmotivated and you have motivated cuts. So unmotivated is the opposite of a motivated cut. So what is a motivated cut? Well, a motivated cut is an edit that is triggered by an event or action within the scene itself, making the transition feel natural and logical. So for example, if we look at some motivated cuts in this scene, let's go for the first few shots. She enters the bathroom, throws the paper in the toilet. That's a motivated cut. She does the action of throwing the paper in the toilet, so then you cut to the toilet bowl. That feels natural. Then when she flushes the toilet, you cut back to her because she's doing a new action. She's flushing the toilet. So all of that feels very seamless, very natural. Those are motivated cuts. These are unmotivated cuts because she's doing the exact same action in the 3 shots. She's just showering. So doing that same action in the 3 different shots makes the edits feel kind of abrupt because we're constantly switching up the angle and creating these jarring edits. It's clear when we're watching this that it's not just a regular scene where she's going to shower. We know something off is probably going to happen. So it's just a great example of how the editing can be intentionally jarring to create an uneasy feeling in the audience. We cut back to the shower head and notice a different angle of the shower head. So he's very intentionally, constantly changing up the angle on us, and this has a disorienting effect. Once again, 2 different angles of her in the shower that we haven't seen before, and they're both unmotivated cuts. It's funny because this whole scene was shot on a 12 by 12 set, which is a small set. But he's really capturing this scene from as many different angles as he possibly can. He's placing the camera all around her in every little crevice that he can. And so not only does this have a disorienting feeling like I just talked about, but what it also does from a pure filmmaking standpoint is because he captured this scene from so many different angles, it gives the editor an infinite amount of possibilities on how to cut this scene. Like the editor has so much to play with. And because he has so much to play with, he can really control the pacing of the scene however he wants. If you just capture a scene from one camera angle, there's not much the editor can do to manipulate the pacing. But once you start getting multiple camera angles, the editor can cut back and forth as often as he wants or as little as he wants, giving him maximum flexibility of the pacing and the rhythm of the scene. And so because Hitchcock captured the scene from so many different angles, it gave the editor the opportunity to keep a really high pace in this scene. We're cutting frequently, we're changing camera angles all the time. The energy of the editing is high. The pacing is high, which once again builds anticipation. We don't know what's gonna happen, but we feel like something's gonna happen. Here we are. The shot of the scene, probably one of the shots of the movie. But I do want to point out something about the editing here. I was just saying how the pacing of the scene and the rhythm of the scene is high. We're cutting frequently, switching up the camera angles. Here, the pace slows back down drastically. We're on this one slow shot, uncut, where we see Mother creeping up behind Marion. This is also the first time a camera movement is used once she's entered the tub. From the moment she enters the tub, all of the other shots are what's called locked off. They're still. But here you have a very deliberate, slow camera movement, and this builds tremendous suspense because it has this feeling of like you almost just kind of want to scream at the screen and tell Marion to turn around. But she's very powerless in this. She cannot hear Mother, and Mother is closing in on her. And this is once again where the loud sound design of the shower comes into play. We don't hear the door opening. Again, if this were a realistic sound design, we would hear the door creeping open. And I'm sure many filmmakers would choose to have the sound of the door creeping open because that can be a scary sound. But here it's omitted entirely. We just hear what Marion is hearing. There's something else I want to point out about the sound design. Listen to how the music comes in when Mother opens the curtain. The music comes in a few frames before Mother pulls back the curtain and wields the knife. I feel like most filmmakers would have chosen to have the music kick in once you see Mother with the knife. That almost feels like the most logical spot to have music come in. However, the fact that the music comes in just a split second before Mother even pulls back the curtain means that the music is coming in at an unexpected point. And the fact that the music comes in at an unexpected point jolts the audience. It scares you. It kind of has a jump scare effect. And this also makes this moment more terrifying. Because let's say the music kicks in once you see Mother. Curtain pulls back, you see Mother. That's the scare. And the music comes in just to support the scare. But you get scared once. Having the music come in and jolt you before the curtain is even pulled back and you see Mother means you get scared twice. You get scared when the music comes in. You're like, oh my gosh. The curtain gets pulled back and then you see Mother, and you get scared twice when you see this really freaky figure with the knife. So you get two scares out of this moment that wouldn't have happened if you embedded the music moment with the scare of seeing Mother. Another iconic sequence of shots. And what I really like about these three back-to-back shots is there's three really quick cuts back-to-back. And what that does is it once again spikes the energy of the scene back up. And this spike in pace, the spike of energy, mirrors the spike of terror that Marion feels in this moment. And this is a perfect example of how the editing can directly reflect how a character feels. And also I like that each cut gets closer and closer to her mouth. It has this closing in effect where we kind of feel like she's trapped. There's a claustrophobic nature to these three shots that I like a lot personally. So now we've arrived at the stabbing sequence, which at the time of its release was probably the most horrific sequence ever put on film because of its depiction of extreme violence and nudity, both of which went against censors at the time. But what's brilliant and masterful about this sequence, and I alluded to this in the intro, is that it's famous for its horrific violence and its display of nudity, but it doesn't actually really show either one. Like, you never see the knife penetrating Marion's skin. It's actually funny, Hitchcock himself was provided with a prop of a torso that was filled with a bunch of blood tubes, and you could stab the prop torso and this blood would squirt out. But he felt like it wasn't necessary. He felt like he created the same effect without actually having to show anything at all. So how did Hitchcock and Tomasini pull this off? How did they make this scene so iconic and so remembered and feared for its horrific violence without actually really depicting violence directly? Well, they did that through implied violence. And so instead of going through this shot by shot, because I think that can get kind of tedious because there are so many shots in this sequence, what I instead want to do is I want to focus on the main cinematic techniques that they used to imply horror without really showing it. And that's four main techniques: rapid fire editing, switching camera angles, cutting at the stab, it's a term I coined, and sound design. So let's first watch the scene in its full glory, and then I'll talk about these techniques. So let's begin by talking about the rapid fire editing in this sequence. So rapid fire editing is an editing technique that uses short, rapid shots to create a sense of intensity, urgency, and or chaos. So from the moment we see Mother wielding the knife after Marion screams, we have 27 cuts in 19 seconds. That's a massive amount of cuts in a short amount of time. For a quick frame of reference, Psycho has an average of around 10 cuts per minute throughout the film. So 27 cuts in 19 seconds is a massive increase in the amount of cuts. And what this does, because we're cutting so quickly, we don't really have the time to sit on each shot and really process what's going on. We're already cutting and moving on to the next thing. A fun little example of this is, let's take a look at the fourth shot of this sequence. This fourth shot of the sequence is a really quick shot of Marion's elbow going up, protecting herself from the knife. but it's so short. It's only 6 frames long. And for reference, there are 24 frames in 1 second. So it's only up for a fraction of a second. So you can't even really, when you watch it in real time, you can't even really process what that is. You can't recognize that it's an elbow. I bet most people who watch this sequence don't know that there's a shot of Marion's elbow going up. And that's kind of the key of this whole sequence. It's not about what each shot is. It's just about putting together as many shots as possible to create this overwhelming sense of chaos for the audience. And you just need a couple shots where you linger on them long enough that imply the violence. For example, shots that are gruesome and intense and violent are like this overhead shot of Marion holding Mother as Mother is trying to stab her. We're on this shot longer than some of the other shots. Same thing goes with like the shot of the blood pooling into the tub. We sit on that long enough to process that that's blood just leaking out of her. We frequently cut back to these shots of Marion screaming. The individual shots are really quick, but we see them frequently enough that we understand that Marion is in agony. She's screaming for her life. She's in terror. And so we just have these peppered shots of violence that make it clear to us what's happening. But other than those, we don't need to sit on shots too long. We just need to put as many shots as possible in there to just create this chaotic feeling that makes you afraid. And that's the key to implying the violence. Now, aside from just the quick rapid fire editing, another thing that makes this sequence feel really chaotic is the constantly switching of camera angles, like we've alluded to before. But here I laid out all of the different camera angles that are in this sequence, and you can tell that almost every shot is a different camera angle. Like in 27 shots, we have 20 different camera angles, which is a very unusual amount of camera angles for a scene. And that's why a short scene like this took a long time to film. This scene took 7 days to film, and it's because of all these camera angles. In film, when you're shooting a scene, whenever you change camera angle, you're not just moving the camera. You have to move all of the lighting equipment and reset the lighting from scratch so that the lighting matches in every shot. So typically, when you're filming a scene, you'll only capture a scene from a few different camera angles. You won't switch it around too much because it's just not efficient for production. But Hitchcock being Hitchcock, he was like, we're going to do this. And so because they had so many different camera angles, this took 7 days to film. But also, because you have so many different camera angles, it allows you, like I was alluding to before, to just create this chaotic, disorienting, overwhelming feeling. And this disorientation matched with the anxiety created by the quick cuts creates a generally unpleasant experience for the viewer, which makes the scene feel more aggressive and more violent. Again, without needing to really show anything particularly gruesome. All right, so the next editing technique that they've used here to make the scene feel more horrific than it really is a term I'm coining as cutting at the stab. Every time the knife is about to penetrate, we cut away. So we never actually see the blade go through. And this is most clearly evident in this shot here, where we linger on the shot just long enough to see the blade touching Marion's skin, but then we cut away to the close-up of her face reacting right at the point where the knife would have pierced through. So this sequence, going from this shot to then Marion screaming, the audience fills in the blank of what just happened. And so in a way, the cutting here, the cutting represents the stab. And that's why I say it's cutting at the stab. But that effect would not be complete without the excellent sound design. So the first thing to notice is how realistic the stabbing sounds. And this sound was actually achieved by the prop department. They brought a bunch of melons to the set and they would stab each melon, and Hitchcock would not be looking at them, though he would just be listening for it, and he would stop them when he heard the stabbing that he thought was the perfect stab sound. And that stabbing is the sound of a Casaba melon getting stabbed. And I actually think that the sound design, the sound of the stab, is more visceral and more painful than if you actually saw the stab. Like, let's try to, like, a little thought experiment. Let's try to imagine an alternate version of the scene where it's a silent movie. You don't have any sounds at all. All you see is the visuals. And we do see Marion's body getting pierced through and you see the blood squirting out. I think this is probably a subjective thing, but to me, just seeing that would not be as irksome and as flinch-worthy as hearing the sound of the stab is. Same way when I hear breaking bones, that's more painful to me than if I were to see bones snapping on screen. So the sound here, hearing the stabbing perfectly in sync with the cutting, is part of what makes this scene so violent. But it's not just the sound design of the stabbing that's so effective here, it's also the score. This Bernard Herrmann score is just so masterful. These loud, screeching strings just have an unpleasant sound to them, and when you mix that in with the stabbing sounds, it just creates a really intense auditory experience. So this overwhelming auditory experience mixed with this disorienting, chaotic visual experience with the constantly switching of the camera angles and this very rapid editing just creates an attack on the senses. And especially at the time, where at the time films were usually cut a lot slower, things weren't this aggressive. This is just attacking you from all angles, and I think that's a huge part of what makes this scene so effective. So once Mother leaves, attack is done, you have this shot of Marion sliding her hand down the wall. That to me is representative of her kind of clinging to life. And what's good to notice about the editing here is that the editing slows back down. We're going to be in long shots once again. We're no longer in the chaos high energy. The assault is done. Now we're calming the pace back down as she tries to grip to life. Okay, so then we have this very long shot. Let's see how long that shot is, just out of curiosity, because it's abnormally long for this scene. That shot alone is 18 seconds. Remember how I said before there were 27 cuts in 19 seconds? This is one cut in 18 seconds. And what's interesting to notice here is that this is the second moving shot in this scene. The first one was the one we talked about before, where Marion was showering and Mother appeared in the background. All the other shots before and during the attack are locked off. They're still. But here is the second moving shot. And I think that's very intentional, because in the first moving shot, we're pushing in towards the cause of Marion's death. And here we're pulling away from Marion as she's dying. So this movement, this pulling away, feels like her life force is pulling away from her. Okay, so then we have this kind of stylish close-up of her hand kind of shaking as she reaches for the curtain. This is very much her last moment alive, and that's kind of reinforced by the fact that because we're in a close-up, we can see her hand shaking as she grabs hold of this curtain, and it's kind of like she's just clinging to life with every last ounce of strength that she has left. And that, to me, seeing that in a close-up just feels really heartbreaking, and it feels really tragic. And here we have this high-up shot. This is the furthest we've ever been from her in the scene. The fact that we're looking down on her from high up makes her feel really small in the frame, and that accentuates how feeble she feels. And it's interesting, there was a shot at the end of this scene that was actually removed, and the writer talked about how to him it was such a heartbreaking shot, and that was this same angle up above, but you see her kind of dead on the floor. And he said the juxtaposition of like this beautiful young woman, completely lifeless and vulnerable, was just such a heartbreaking shot. But then Hitchcock got rid of it because he didn't feel like it was necessary. And I think he got rid of it because you get that same feeling in this shot here and you don't need it twice, which is, economical storytelling. All right, this is a cool shot of like the curtain snapping off its hooks as she kind of drags it down, and having this close up of the hooks as the curtain snaps off of them one by one. That kind of ticking of the one by one kind of feels like her time has run out, like the clocks have ticked out. And this to me is just a symbolic, metaphoric shot for her dying. This end sequence here has a lot of visual symbolism that we're going to talk about, and this is certainly one of them. Next shot, she just collapses down hard on the ground. The sound design is quite intentional. It sounds like a loud thud. And just having this loud thud with this hard cut of her smashing down onto the ground just feels aggressive. And the aggressiveness of that cut, I think, just kind of mirrors the aggressiveness of what's happened to her in this moment. So now we once again have this iconic shot of the shower head. Why is the shot here at this stage? I don't think it takes the same voyeuristic element that it did before, because right before she was kind of showering right under it and it feels like it was looking really right down on her. Now that doesn't have quite the same effect, in my opinion. Why is the shot here? I mean, who knows for sure, right? Only Hitchcock and Tomasini can really say so. But from my perspective as an editor, what this shot accomplishes is that on face value, it's kind of a soothing shot. Hearing the water flowing is kind of relaxing. The same way people go to sleep listening to waterfall sounds or listening to white noise. There's something inherently soothing about just hearing the water trickling. Like when people take a shower, it's kind of their opportunity to decompress. You usually feel quite safe in your shower. So the fact that she was killed in such a violent manner in an environment that was supposed to be soothing, relaxing, and calming is just that much more horrific and sad and just devastating. And that's also something that comes into play in this next shot. This is another example where the camera is moving, and the camera is moving really slowly, following the blood as it swirls down. And the fact that the camera is kind of moving along with the blood, it almost looks like a river flowing. Once again, this idea of like a calming image, seemingly calming imagery, juxtaposed with inherent violence. And the fact that we kind of go in close on the drain as the blood swirls into it, that's also another visual metaphor for the life force draining out of her body. And as the blood disappears down the drain, we have this iconic edit to her eye. This edit is called a cross-dissolve match cut. Cross-dissolve because we're dissolving from the drain to the eye. It's not a hard cut anymore. It's a soothing, slow dissolve. And once again, the fact that it's not a hard cut and it's a dissolve, there's something calming. There's something soothing. There's something gentle about the editing here. It's no longer harsh. And we're match cutting because we're matching the drain, the shape of the drain, to the shape of her eye. And we go in this shot from a close-up, an extreme close-up of her eye, to this close-up of her face where we see her dead on the tile. And what really works about the shot is that by starting close-up on the eye, we're starting on an undamaged part of her body. Her eye is still pristine. Her eye still looks youthful. And then you slowly pull back, and to contrast that beauty is this pretty horrific shot of her lifeless face just really smushed up against the tile, pressed up against the tile. So in this same shot, we get that beauty and we get the horror. And this juxtaposition between beauty and horror is also a theme that's reinforced by the mere setting of this scene, where you have this kind of clean, pristine bathroom, the beauty, juxtaposed with the bloodied mess that happens from the violent attack. And I think on some level, if a young, vibrant woman can get killed in what feels like a clean, pristine, safe environment, nobody is safe. And that's why a lot of people, when they saw this scene at the time, they became afraid to take a shower. So we have it. We've made it through this iconic psycho shower scene. If you've made it this far, I'm extremely grateful. I hope this was helpful in kind of understanding why a scene like this is actually so effective, whether you are a aspiring filmmaker or film fan. I mean, there's no better people to learn from than these masters. So this was a blast of a video to make. I hope it was helpful. If you like this kind of content, please let me know in the comments. I would love to keep making more of these if it's something that kind of resonates with you. If you're new here, consider subscribing if you like, but no pressure. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.